Hello again. This is Pastor Don Phillips of Don and Carol Phillips Ministries in Kansas City, and I'm glad you tuned in today. And some of you have been missing my recordings, I'm afraid, because I've had some problem with my voice over the last few weeks, but I think God is bringing me deliverance, and so I'm back on the air for today. And my subject for today is slaying the giant of discouragement in your life. Now, I hope I'm talking to a group of people today who do not have any discouragement in their life. But that's a very difficult thing to do because a lot of people have discouragement. Let me read to you from Nehemiah chapter 4, and I'm going to read 10 through 14. In Judah, it was said, the strength of those who hear these burdens is falling away. There is too much rubble. By ourselves we will not be able to rebuild the wall. And our enemies said, they will not know or see until we come among them and kill them and stop the work. At that time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, you must return to us. So in the lowest parts of the space between the wall in open places, I stationed the people by their clans, with their swords, and with their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, and your wives, and your homes. It was a time of real trial for Israel. They were trying to move back into Jerusalem, and they needed to rebuild the wall, and they needed to rebuild the temple and all of that. But let me ask you this. What exactly are the limits of human tolerance? What are the units of measurement for pain and discouragement? And how does our discouragement threshold differ from mine? Well, I've got to tell you, I'm not sure I can answer these questions, but the human spirit can be an amazing thing. Take the case of Lawrence Hanratty, who was given the name of unluckiest man in New York City. Let me give you just a brief rundown of his life. The poor fellow profited in the Los Angeles Times, was nearly electrocuted to death in a construction site accident in 1984. For weeks, he lay in a coma with his lawyers fighting for his liberty and claim, and that is until one of them was disbarred and 2 of them died. So he's helpless, possibly, and now he's losing his help. And then Hanratty's wife ran off with her lawyer. Finally, after he recuperated, Mr. Hanratty lost his car in a terrible crash. When the police finished their job at the terrible crash, they went on their way, and some criminals came by and robbed him. Then an insurance company fought to cut off his workers' compensation benefits, and his landlord tried to evict him. You're talking about trouble. He was in it. He suffered from depression and agorithmia. He required a canister of oxygen for his breathing and took 42 pills a day for his heart and his liver ailments. Eventually, a city councilman took up his case. Neighbors ran to rally around him. Incredibly, Lawrence Hanratty summed up his life like this. Now remember, all I've told you tonight about what happened to him. When they asked him, how's your life? He said, there's always hope. What would you have said in a case like that? The dictionary defines discourage as to deprive of courage, to deter, to dishearten, to hinder. Along with the other D words, you can throw in doom and depression and defeat and despair. Well, the mind dwells on these when life has us pinned down to the mat. The New Testament uses 3 Greek words to carry the idea of disheartened, dispirited, and discouraged. And these words were variously translated in the New Testament as to faint, to grow weary. For instance, 2 Corinthians 4:1 says, "Therefore, since we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we do not lose heart." 2 Corinthians 4:16 says, "Therefore we do not lose heart, even though our outward man is perishing. The inward man is being renewed day by day. Therefore I ask that you do not lose heart." Ephesians 3:13 says, "Therefore I ask that you do not lose heart at my tribulations for you, for which is your glory." Luke 18:1, "Then he spoke a parable to them, that men ought always to pray and not to lose heart." So from the book of Nehemiah, in the verses that I read to you at the beginning, the Bible gives us much encouragement while the devil and his group is trying daily to discourage us. And I want to tell you, that's a picture of your life and mine. We can learn a lesson about the renovation of hope from the rubble of discouragement. Did you understand what I just said? I said to regain and understand the deal of hope, and we don't need to get discouraged because of all the rubble that's in the world today. Well, that's a strong lesson here for me as well as for you. During one of the darkest periods of Israel and Judah, the invaders rolled in. And I want you to notice that the invaders rushed in during a very dark period. They didn't come in when Israel was up high. They came in when they were discouraged. Is that the way it has happened with you? The Babylonians destroyed the holy city of Jerusalem, losing its glories and carrying away the people to enslavement in a distant land. It seemed that God's people had lost it all: their land, their pride, their very identity as a nation set apart for a special destiny. Now, did you hear what I said there? They lost all of this other, but they were a nation set apart for a special destiny. So they really and truly didn't have anything to worry about, and that's where you and I are also. These are the darkest times, days of lamentation and weeping and silence. The first time they were allowed to return to their homes and rebuild the temple, we read of two biblical heroes, a priest named Ezra and an administrator named Nehemiah. Each of them has a book of his own in the Bible. Ezra has been called the priest to broken hearts, while Nehemiah is known as the rebuilder of broken dreams. From the book of Nehemiah, we can learn a lesson about the renovation, the rebuilding of hope from the rubble of discouragement. Some of you listening to me today are in a rubble of discouragement, and you just don't know what to do. I'm telling you, here is the answer. I'm bringing the answer to you. While the walls lay in ruins, the people of Israel hadn't had a night of peaceful sleep. Raiders from the outlying princes had been able to attack by night and keep the Israelite settlers discouraged. The threat of a Hebrew revival was an unwelcome thought to the neighbors. God's people were under attack from every side. And I want you to hear and understand this. The greatest weapons in the arsenal of our enemies is fear and discouragement. Let me say that again. The greatest weapons in the arsenal of our enemies is fear and discouragement. In the 4th chapter of Nehemiah, they were halfway through their project of rebuilding the walls. At this halfway point, a fresh wave of discouragement breaks out, and Nehemiah has to deal with discouragement. And the way he did it will still work today. Are you ready to hear it? So let's just do what Nehemiah did, and I think I need to hear this as well as you. First, I want to talk about factor number 1, and that's fatigue. Well, Vince Lombardi, a highly recognized and admired football coach, once observed, fatigue makes cowards of us all. Judah observed the same thing, but he put it this way: the strength of the laborers is falling. It wasn't really a loss of strength. It was the fact that they were being fatigued or afraid. And 52 days of back-breaking labor, fatigue was catching up with them. And when energy runs short, so does courage. The devil's business is to wear out the saints of the Most High God. Do we really understand what I just said? Don't you dare let him discourage you when he tries. Turn the table and discourage him. We all need to learn this. Factor number 2 in this is frustration. Yeah, they were all frustrated. Judah's workers were not only weary and discouraged, they were no doubt frustrated. Nehemiah said, there is so much rubbish that we are not able to build the wall. Daniel 7:25 tells us of a day when the enemy will seek to wear out the saints. He, the devil, shall speak words against the Most High and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Do you feel worn out today? God isn't through with you. Turn the table on the devil and get up and get going. We can see this all around us every day. This group could no longer see the proud, the gleaming walls of their dreams. Their visions of glory seemed like a mirage in the desert. There was nothing between them and broken bricks and mud and debris. They were experiencing a burnout. You know, you can live out, you can wear out, or you can burn out. To burn out means striving for a goal you cannot accomplish. Maybe that's where you are today. Then if you are, go to God, because he can help you overcome that. Now, factor number 3 is failure. Judah's report to headquarters went like this. The strength of the laborers is falling, and there is no rubbish that we cannot, that so much rubbish that we're unable to build a wall. Negative talk is infectious. It spreads like a virus to infect a large group. I think every one of us needs to memorize that statement. Failure is universal. What makes the difference is how we handle it. Sadly, when things go wrong and we're just as apt to give up and not give an ear to the enemy, to the Lord. Instead, we give our ear to the enemy. Factor number 4 is fear. Israel's workers at that time were quick to admit their fear, and they had to explain the reason for it. So in verses 11 and 12, they wrote, and our adversaries said, they will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. So it was, when the Jews who dwelt near them came, that they told us 10 times, from whatever place you run, they will be upon you. Think about it. In other words, there is nothing you can do about it, whether it's financial, personal, political, or medical. That's what what they were trying to impress them, is that there's nothing you can do about it. So, we've talked about language, we've talked about fatigue, we've talked about fear, frustration, failure, and all of these things are real. But I want to tell you, here's how you are to respond to it. You probably won't have time, but you need to write some of this down. We need to respond to discouragement. So we're going to look at 5 ways. First, the first response should be cry out to God. In verse 4 to 5, hear our God, for we are dispersed from turning their approach and their own heads, and give them plunder to the land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity, and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you. For they have provoked you to anger before the builders. Then in verse 9 he said, nevertheless, we made our prayer to our God, and because of them we set a watch against them day and night. Now someone might say, wait a minute, if you prayed, why did you need to set up a watch? But don't just don't judge us. Here's what Jesus advises us at that time. Behold, I send you as sheep in the midst of the wolves. Therefore, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. How often do we cry out to God last instead of first? The second response is continue the work that God has given you to do. The most common immediate reaction is to quit. The times we most often feel like quitting are the times we do our best to keep holding on. Nehemiah 6:3 says, So I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you? The third response is concentrate on the big picture. Nehemiah turned his eyes toward the big picture. And in verses 13 to 14, he says, Therefore I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings and set the people according to their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the members of the group, Listen to me. The fourth thing I want you to look at is the fourth response, which says, claim the encouragement of God's promises. Let's take another look at verse 14. Do not be afraid of them, he said. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Let me tell you, there are times when you and I, like David, need to encourage ourselves in the Lord, but you don't have the right, you don't have to be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for what is yours. God is our refuge and strength, is a very present help in time of trouble. Therefore we will not fear, even though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the seas, though the waters roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with its trembling, Selah. And that just means think about that. 2 Thessalonians 3:13 says, But as for you, brethren, do not grow weary in doing good. Then in Galatians 6:9, he says, And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due time we shall reap if we will not lose heart. And here's the last response that I want us to notice, and that's carry someone else's burden. You mean, Pastor, if I'm feeling down and out, I ought to help someone else? Well, if we read just a little further into this fourth chapter, we will find a band of stragglers, the remnant of fallen Israel, who had bonded together to become a team. Some were carrying loads, some were guarding, some were building, but all were wearing swords and they were in unity. So remember the old saying, united we stand. Discouragement leads out to us being cut off from the ones we need. And the best way for you to become encouraged is to find someone else and encourage them. You'll be surprised how it'll change your attitude. God bless you.